climate and biodiversity plans, no new coal plants after 2021, and mobilising $100 billion a year for climate action, and helping developing countries make the shift to green economies, a top priority of the upcoming COP26 meeting in Glasgow.
We need you, all of you. All of you are critical to global recovery. I urge you to work with your governments to put people first in their budgets and recovery plans. Dear friends, the pathway is there. The choice is ours. Let's move forward with hope and conviction, and I thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for underscoring the fact that we are neither hopeless nor helpless. And also for setting out the 5 key priorities for our recovery and beyond. I'm sure we'll no doubt hear more throughout the day. And next, I have the honor of introducing His Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76th Session of the United National General Assembly, the Global Town Hall of our Global Village. Welcome, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to speak at the second SDG moment, an invaluable platform in our joint efforts to deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As we are all aware, the pandemic has severely impacted the SDGs. But the irony is that the SDGs themselves provide us the most comprehensive and universal toolkit in our efforts to recover sustainably. The decade of action launched in 2020 will now need to be a decade of recovering sustainably. Excellencies, my promise for a presidency of hope during this 76th session of the General Assembly is underpinned by 5 rays of hope, each intrinsically connected to the SDGs. Our first and second rays of hope on recovering from COVID-19 and rebuilding sustainably correspond directly to SDG 3 on good health and well-being, as well as SDG 8 on jobs and economic growth. The third ray on responding to the needs of the planet corresponds to a multitude of SDGs, including SDG 7 on clean energy, SDG 13 on climate action, and SDG 14 on the ocean and seas. And our final 2 rays covering human rights and UN revitalization cut across and uphold the entirety of the SDG agenda. Why else pursue such ambitious goals if not to respect and enhance the rights of the people everywhere? How better to achieve than through a multilateral system that is equipped to do just that. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, the workings of getting the SDGs back on track are our shared responsibility. The General Assembly can and is willing to play a part. Going forward, the gaps in political will and resource commitment remain a common fault line in our resolve to progress the SDGs. This must change. We need to ensure that countries, in particular the LDCs, LLDCs, and the SIDS, have access to adequate resources and capacity, support in their efforts to recover from the pandemic and achieve the SDG targets. Like everything else on policy, there is no one-size-fits-all. For this very reason, the SDG moment and platforms such as the ECOSOC's High-Level Political Forum offer an opportunity to reflect on where we are, where we could be, and what is holding us back, and the way forward. I encourage all to share success, best practices, lessons learned, challenges, and failures alike to achieve the SDGs. Only together, through effective collaboration and meaningful cooperation, we will learn to find the best way to move forward. Let the setback that the world has seen strengthen our resolve and reinforce our determination to recover from the pandemic, to build sustainably and achieve the SDGs. Together, it is possible, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those encouraging words. We can't measure progress without the right metrics. So before we go any further, let's get a reality check on SDG progress 6 years after their adoption. We're joined in the SDG studio by Ms. Claire Casey, the Global Head of Policy and Insights at Economist Impact.
When world leaders came together in 2015 to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals, we all knew the challenge ahead of us. And we've made progress, but it has been hard-won, uneven, and fragile. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how fragile. Today, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice. Do we allow these fractures to grow, or do we break through to a greener, safer, and more equitable future? At Economist Impact, we're dedicated to driving positive change by using data and evidence to better understand the biggest issues and evaluate the best solutions. And we've been closely tracking action on the SDGs. Today, as we explore progress against the Sustainable Development Goals, let's remember, we know what we have to do, and we have the tools. The question is, do we have the will to act and keep the promise of Agenda 2030? Let's start with Goal 1, eliminating extreme poverty by 2030. In just 18 months, the COVID-19 pandemic erased 5 years' worth of progress, pushing more than 97 million people back into extreme poverty. If we don't take action now to right our course, we risk arriving at 2030 with more than 600 million people living in extreme poverty. We also know we can't move forward without women and girls. Since 2015, we've made progress on gender equality, but not nearly enough. Maternal mortality continues to fall, but we need to move more than 4 times faster if we're to achieve our target of 70 deaths per 100,000 live births by 2030. In politics, women now hold 26% of seats in national parliaments. But at the current rate of improvement, it will take no fewer than 40 years to achieve gender parity. And when we look at the workforce, women are still grossly underrepresented, with less than half of women participating, compared to more than 70% of men. This hasn't budged since 2015. COVID has only exacerbated these disparities. Female-dominated industries were disproportionately affected across both formal and informal sectors. The number of women employed declined by 54 million in 2020. As COVID impoverishes communities, closes schools, and reduces access to reproductive health care, it's estimated that 10 million more girls than previously projected are at a risk of becoming child brides through 2030. The risk of violence has also risen. Before the pandemic, we knew that 1 in 3 women would experience violence at least once in her lifetime. During the pandemic, some countries reported a devastating 5-fold increase in calls to helplines. When we talk about gender equality, we tend to address it through this humanitarian lens. But equality doesn't just benefit individuals. It benefits whole societies and economies. Achieving gender equality could unlock $12 trillion. The opposite is also true. Nations that fail women fail. One powerful tool to ensure equality of opportunity across communities and around the world is connectivity. And this is an area where we've made tremendous progress. 4 billion people around the world are connected to the internet, 1 billion of whom came online since 2015. But COVID has acted sort of like a time machine, hurtling us all forward into a digital future in which we access our jobs, our education, healthcare, financial services, even our friends and family, all online. So for those 3 billion people still unconnected, the costs have never been higher. 1/3 of children globally were unable to access remote learning during COVID lockdowns, and we saw the immediate impact. 101 million children fell below minimum reading proficiency levels in 2020. We also know the returns we get from investments in connectivity. They're massive. Connecting schools to the internet boosts GDP by up to 20% in least connected countries. It also shows how intertwined the SDGs are. An increase in connectivity can contribute to increases in educational outcomes, prosperity, and gender equality. But a prerequisite to meaningful connectivity is access to reliable, affordable electricity. Years of good progress, we've lost ground here as well. In 2020, we saw the number of people without electricity in Africa increase for the first time in 6 years. Without major changes today, we could reach 2030 with 660 million people living without access to power. Expanding electricity must be addressed within the context of the ongoing worsening crisis that is climate change. Only by unleashing the power of clean energy will we be able to end energy poverty while protecting our planet. After a brief pause in 2020 when we all stayed home, emissions are back on the rise. Climate change is not a future challenge. We're already feeling its impact. The economic costs from extreme weather and wildfires were $1.3 trillion over the last 10 years. That's a 40% increase from the previous decade. And if we continue on this course, we will create an unlivable planet, with the greatest suffering borne by those least responsible. In 2015, the world came together in Paris to commit to limit global warming, and we've made important progress since then. The cost of renewables continues to decline. Clean power is now often the most affordable option, and low-carbon fuels have surpassed coal as the largest source of electricity generation. But as we look towards COP26 in Glasgow this November, it must be with clear eyes. Our policies are grossly insufficient to meet the present challenge. Our research tells us that more governments and businesses are turning their attention to this issue than ever before, but it's not enough. We must act now to prevent the worst. COVID was a wake-up call and a model for what's possible. It showed us what happens when an abstract threat becomes very real. In 2020 alone, governments mobilized and deployed $14 trillion in pandemic support. Through unprecedented public and private collaboration, we developed and deployed safe and effective vaccines faster than anyone imagined. We did it because we had to. A sustainable, inclusive future demands we act with the same urgency. Governments, businesses, civil society working together. To achieve the promise of Agenda 2030, we will need partnerships and collective action, technology and innovation, effective institutions and delivery mechanisms, better data to set baselines and track our progress, and a relentless focus on our responsibility to future generations and to those most at risk of being left behind. We are 1 year into the decade of action. It is time to act.
Our thanks to Ms. Casey on the very sober and clear-eyed look at what has to be done to get the SDGs back on track. And as we heard earlier from the UN Secretary General, doing so is going to require action from all actors and the engagement of all people, especially youth, which is why we're therefore pleased and, as a Korean American, distinctly honored to be joined by His Excellency Mr. Moon Jae-in, the President of the Republic of Korea, to deliver a statement and to introduce a very special guest. Welcome, Mr. President.
압둘라 샤히드 의장님, 안토니오 구테리시 사무총장님, 귀빈 여러분, 제2차 SDG 모멘트 행사에 함께하게 되어 매우 기쁩니다. 특별한 자리를 마련해 주셔서 감사드립니다. 얼마 전 유엔 대학의 연구소는 지구 초원의 모든 재난은 서로 연결되어 있다는 연구 보고서를 발표했습니다. 예를 들면 북극의 폭염과 미국 텍사스의 한파, 코로나 팬데믹과 방글라데시의 사이클론이 탄소 배출과 환경 파괴를 고리로 밀접하게 이어져 있다는 것입니다. 문제가 연결되어 있다면 해법도 연결되어 있을 것입니다. 인류가 국경을 넘어 협력하는 것이야말로 위기 극복의 첫걸음입니다. 6년 전 유엔은 바로 이 자리에서 지속가능 발전 목표에 합의했고 2년 전에는 2030년까지 행동의 10년을 약속했습니다. 포용적 미래를 향한 인류의 발걸음은 코로나로 인해 지체되었지만 코로나는 역설적으로 그 목표의 중요성을 더욱 절실하게 일깨워 주었습니다. 우리의 실천 의지는 더욱 강해졌습니다. 우리는 단지 위기 극복을 넘어서서 보다 나은 회복과 재건을 이루어야 합니다. 서로 연결된 공동의 실천이 이루어진다면 분명 우리는 해낼 수 있습니다. 첫째, 우리는 포용과 상생의 마음을 지금 즉시 함께 행동으로 옮겨야 합니다. 코로나 백신에 대한 국제사회의 공평한 접근과 배분이 시작입니다. 한국은 G7 정상회의에서 코백스 2억 불 공여를 약속했습니다. 글로벌 백신 허브의 한 축으로서 백신 보급과 지원을 늘리려는 노력도 계속할 것입니다. 나아가 WHO를 비롯한 국제보건협력 강화에 적극 기여하겠습니다. 둘째, 국경을 넘는 협력으로 기후위기에 대응해야 합니다. 지구는 예상보다 빠르게 뜨거워지고 있으며 이상기후가 세계 곳곳에서 속출하고 있습니다. 탄소 중립 목표에 선진국과 개도국이 보조를 맞추어야 합니다. 그러기 위해서는 기후 선진국들의 경험과 기술이 개도국들과 공유되고 전수되고 협력이 이루어져야 합니다. 한국은 2050 탄소 중립 시나리오를 오는 10월 말 확정하고 캅 26 계기에 상향된 NDC 목표를 제출할 계획입니다. 한국은 그린 뉴딜 ODA를 확대하고 개도국에서 선진국으로 성장한 우리의 경험과 기술을 공유하며 개도국의 녹색 회복과 탄소 중립을 적극적으로 돕겠습니다. 셋째, 지속 가능한 발전을 위해 4차 산업혁명 시대의 기술을 적극 활용해야 합니다. 하지만 디지털 기술과 인프라는 한편으로 새로운 격차와 불평등을 낳고 있습니다. 디지털 격차와 불평등을 해소하는 것이 또 하나의 시대적 과제입니다. 이는 에너지 전환 과정에서도 발생하는 문제입니다. 사람을 소외시키지 않는 포용적인 디지털 전환과 그린 전환을 이루지 않으면 안 됩니다. 마지막으로 미래 세대를 존중하며 세대 간 공존의 지혜를 모아야 합니다. 세대 간 생각과 문화의 차이를 넘어서야 합니다. 모든 세대는 국적과 인종, 성별을 뛰어넘어 서로 소통하고 교감하는 지구 공동체의 일원이라는 인식을 가져야 합니다. 빈곤과 불평등, 기후변화 같은 기성세대가 해결하지 못한 위기에 대해 미래세대의 목소리에 더 귀 기울이는 것은 기성세대의 의무이기도 합니다. 기성세대가 변화에 대한 두려움 때문에 해결하지 못한 문제들에 대해 젊은 세대의 감수성과 공감 능력이 해법을 찾을 수도 있습니다. 특히 미래는 미래 세대의 것이라는 것을 잊지 말아야 할 것입니다. 오늘 이 자리에는 전 세계 청년들과 교감하고 있는 탁월한 청년들 BTS가 미래 세대와 문화를 위한 대통령 특별 사절로 함께하고 있습니다. 최고의 민간 특사 BTS와 함께하는 오늘 이 자리가 지속 가능 발전을 향한 미래 세대의 선한 의지와 행동을 결집하는 계기가 되기를 바랍니다. 한국 국민들은 모두가 안전하지 않으면 누구도 안전하지 않다는 생각으로 누구도 소외되지 않는 포용적 국제협력의 여정에 언제나 굳건한 동반자로 함께할 것입니다. 감사합니다. 이제 제가 다음 발언자를 소개하겠습니다. 이 시대의 최고로 사랑받는 아티스트, 미래 세대와 문화를 위한 대통령 특별사절 BTS. 이제 BTS 이야기를 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
존경하는 압둘라 샤히드 제76차 유엔 총회의장님, 안토니오 구테레시 유엔 사무총장님, 문재인 대통령님, 그리고 각국 정상 여러분, 이 자리에 서게 되어 진심으로 영광입니다. 대한민국 대통령 특사 방탄소년단입니다. 저희는 오늘 미래 세대의 이야기를 전하기 위해 이 자리에 왔습니다. 오기 전에 전 세계 10대, 20대 분들께 지난 2년은 어땠고 또 지금은 어떤 세상을 살아가고 있는지 물어보았는데요. 어떤 대답들이 있었는지 진 씨가 소개해 주시겠습니다.
네, 같이 한번 보실까요? 보는 것만으로도 기분 좋은 에너지가 느껴지지 않나요? 지난 2년은 사실 저도 당혹스럽고 막막한 기분이 들 때가 있었는데 그렇더라도 Let's live on, 지금을 잘 살아가자 라고 외치는 분들이 있었습니다.
네, 가장 다양한 것을 도전할 수 있는 시기에 멈춰만 있을 수는 없으니까요. 솔직히 처음에는 누구를 탓할 수도 없고 억울하셨을 겁니다. 나는 어제와 똑같은데 한순간에 평행세계에 온 것처럼 세상이 변해버렸으니까요.
입학식, 졸업식이 취소가 됐다는 소식도 들었습니다. 인생에서 꼭 기념해야 하고 기념하고픈 순간이셨을 텐데 많이 안타깝고 아쉬우셨을 것 같습니다. 저희들 같은 경우에도 오랫동안 열심히 준비한 콘서트 투어가 취소가 되면서 정말 많이 속상도 하고 저희가 완성하고 싶었던 순간을 한동안 계속 그리워했던 것 같습니다.
네, 맞습니다. 코로나로 잃어버린 것들에 대한 일종의 애도가 필요한 시간이었습니다. 네, 그동안 당연하다고 여겼던 순간순간의 소중함을 다시 한번 깨닫는 시간이었습니다.
방금 이제 슈가 씨께서 당연하게 여겼던 소중한 것들에 대해서 얘기해 주셨는데요. 저희의 질문에도 소중했던 순간이 담긴 사진들로 답변해 주신 분들이 많았습니다. 특히 이 자연과 함께한 사진들을 많이 보내주셨는데 2년 동안 자연을 느끼고 가꾸면서 시간을 더 특별하게 느끼시지 않았나 생각이 듭니다.
그렇네요. 근데 지구에서 우리에게 남은 시간이 얼마 안 남은 것 같은 불안감이 들어서인 걸까요? 방금 우리가 애도해야 했던 것들에 대해 이야기해봤는데 지구에 대한 애도는 정말 생각하고 싶지도 않네요. 기후변화가 중요한 문제라는 건 다들 공감하시지만 어떤 게 최선의 해결 방법이라고 이야기하는 건 정말 쉽지 않더라고요. 단정지어 말하기엔 어려운 주제인 것 같아요.
맞습니다. 사실 어려운 이야기입니다. 하지만 이 자리에 오기 위해 준비하는 동안 저희가 알게 됐던 것은 환경 문제에 진심으로 관심을 가지고 또 전공으로 택해서 공부하는 학생분들이 굉장히 많다는 사실이었습니다. 아무도 겪어보지 않은 미래이고 거기서는 우리들이 채워갈 시간이 더 많기 때문에 어떤 방식으로 살아가는 게 맞을지 스스로 답을 찾아보고 계신 거였습니다.
그러니까 우리의 미래에 대해 너무 어둡게만 생각하진 않으셨으면 좋겠습니다. 앞으로의 세상을 위해 직접 고민하고 노력하고 길을 찾고 있는 분들도 계실 테니까요. 우리가 주인공인 이야기의 페이지가 한참 남았는데 벌써부터 엔딩이 정해진 것처럼 말하진 않으셨으면 좋겠습니다.
물론 나는 준비가 됐더라도 세상이 멈춰있는 기분이 들 때도 있고 길을 완전히 잃어버린 것 같은 느낌이 들 때도 있습니다. 저희도 그랬던 때가 있었고요.
그래서 지금은 10대, 20대들을 코로나 로스트 제너레이션으로 부르기도 한다고 들었습니다. 가장 다양한 기회와 시도가 필요한 시기에 길을 잃게 되었다는 의미에서요. 그런데 어른들 눈에 보이지 않는다고 해서 길을 잃었다고 말할 수 있을까요?
네, 사진을 함께 보시겠습니다. 온라인 공간에서 새로운 방식으로 친구들과 만남을 이어가고 새롭게 공부를 시작하고 또 앞으로의 죄송합니다. 네, 새롭게 공부를 시작하고 더 건강하게 살아가기 위해 노력하시는 분들이 많습니다. 이것은 길을 잃었다기보다 새롭게 용기 내고 도전 중인 모습으로 보여집니다.
네, 그런 의미에서 로스트 제너레이션이 아니라 웰컴 제너레이션이라는 이름이 더 잘 어울린 것 같습니다. 변화에 겁먹기보단 웰컴이라고 말하면서 앞으로 걸어나가는 세대라는 의미에서요.
맞습니다. 가능성과 희망을 믿고 있으면 예상 밖의 상황에서도 길을 잃는 것이 아니라 더 새로운 길을 발견하게 될 것이라고 믿어 의심치 않습니다.
네, 우리가 택하는 방법들 중에 완벽하지 않은 것들도 분명하게 있겠지만 그렇다고 해서 할 수 있는 게 아무것도 없을 거라고 생각하진 않습니다.
중요한 건 변화 앞에서 어떤 선택을 하느냐 아닐까요? 저희가 유엔에 온다는 소식을 듣고 정말 많은 분들이 백신 접종을 했는지 궁금해 하시더라고요. 이 자리를 빌려 말씀드리면 저희 7명 모두 백신을 맞았습니다.
백신 접종은 저희를 기다리는 팬들을 만나기 위해서 그리고 이 자리에 오기 위해 끊어야 하는 일종의 티켓 같은 거였다고 생각하고 있습니다. 오늘 전해드린 메시지처럼 우리는 우리가 지금 할 수 있는 것들을 하고 있는 중이니까요.
백신 접종도 그렇고 새로운 일상을 이어나가기 위한 노력들이 계속되고 있으니까 우리 곧 얼굴을 마주하고 만날 날이 멀지 않은 것 같습니다. 그때까지 모두 긍정적인 에너지로 다시 반겼으면 좋겠습니다.
세상이 멈춘 줄 알았는데 분명히 조금씩 앞으로 나아가고 있습니다. 모든 선택은 그 선택이 곧 변화의 시작이라고 믿고 있습니다. 엔딩이 아니라요. 새롭게 시작되는 세상에서 모두에게 서로에게 웰컴이라고 말해줄 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 이제 저희가 들려드릴 Permission to Dance는 모두에게 미리 전하고 싶은 저희의 웰컴 인사입니다.
It's like that opinion when your heart just like a drum, beating louder with no way to guard it. When it all seems like it's wrong, say louder out and join to that feeling we're just getting started.
And when the noise gets crowded and the rhythm's got you falling behind,
just dream up a that moment when you look yourself right in the eye. Did you say I wanted this from you? This time we going and nothing that can stop how we move. Yeah, let's make a place to live just like we could and rolling like a dancing force.
we don't and then we can keep the fire alive. Cause it's not over till the song will say one more time. Say, I wanna dance to music, got me going, got me going, that's how we move. Hey, let's take a breath and live just like we're golden and rolling like we're dancing through. Everything we move, we don't need to worry, 'cause when we fall, we know how to let go. Just walk, don't walk, don't lie. 'Cause we don't need permission. We don't need permission to dance. We don't need permission to dance.
What if we could take the wisdom and experience of established leaders and combine it with the talents and the innovation of youth? That's what we're talking about in today's discussion. What if it's not just one generation passing the baton to another, but multiple generations working and co-creating together? Well, we're being joined today by two intergenerational leaders who are doing just that. Each is using the SDG goals as a guide to focus their work and concentrate on creating together. We have legendary stateswoman, elder, and SDG advocate Gracia Michel, who's championed education as a pathway for peace and prosperity for all, especially young women. We're also being joined by STEM activist and SDG advocate Valentina Muñoz Ravanal, who at 19 years old has already helped write the first artificial intelligence policy in her home country of Chile. Thank you both for joining us.
Hello, thank you very much.
Ms. Gracia Michel, let me begin with you. You've said in the past that we are living through a crisis of consciousness and a crisis of leadership, frankly. How can intergenerational co-creation help fight this problem and be part of the solution?
Let me bring one example of what, as a member of the elders, we did exactly this. In celebration of Mandela's 100 years, we brought together civil society organizations across the globe, and I mean from all continents. And we brought activists who are working in peace, justice, climate change, human rights, education, women and youth empowerment, to really give the best of examples of what is going on the world from the grassroots. And this was an experience to bring the local to the global, bringing all continents together, men and women, old and young, and from different perspectives to reimagine a world of peace, a world where climate is not going to be aware, we will be able to protect our planet, to provide education to young generations, to bridge inequalities. And with this, we build a movement we called Working Together for a Better Future. So I believe today we need to multiply these kind of initiatives, bringing all we can around the SDGs, recreating, reimagining, reinventing ways of recognizing dignity of every single human being across globe. And I believe that way we can implement the Sustainable Development Goals.
Valentina, you are an award-winning robotics engineer as well as the tip of the spear in artificial intelligence, both tools towards creating change. How do you think intergenerational cooperation can move forward?
Well, I think that Around the world, especially in Latin America, it is thought that if you don't have a vote, you don't have a voice. And who has no vote? Children. And democracy is built around that idea, institutionalizing the way of doing politics, when the reality is that the personal is political, and each of our problems and strategies to combat them are political too. And there is no age to change the world. Malala and Greta Thunberg have proven it more than anything that what we need is first to establish new forms of participation and political influence in which children and adolescents can be more than just spectators, but also protagonists of discussion and change. That it's some kind of thing that we made around the construction of the first national artificial intelligence policy in Chile, my country. We tried with UNICEF, with the Defensory Childhood and the Latin American Association of Young Women for Ideas to establish youth voices around political that involve us all. I think that this is a problem that has its roots really deep into our communities, starting into our families. And I think that there is the starting point. We can do something so simple, so basic, so easy as asking our children what do they think while we are having lunch or dinner. Our dinner table is the first place where children learn to be quiet. Let's change that. Why we can't change that? Encourage our children to think politically and to speak loud about what they think. That's how our dinner tables are going to become into decision tables. And that's how we're going to teach children that they don't need to ask for permission for saying what they think, because there are no adults conversations and they can conquer every other space that where they feel that belong and want to be a part of.
And Ms. Gracia Michel, in preparation for this conversation, I looked up old articles about you and saw photos of the young Gracia Michel, as fiery as ever today. I wonder what your concerns are, though, as you look out on the horizon about the future of working intergenerationally.
I think we need to build movements. Wherever we are and whatever we are concerned with and we are working, when you are one voice, you are weak. But when you bring people together and who think together and act together, that voice cannot be ignored. Whether it's regional, whether it is the UN, when we work together as movements, we remove the barriers which are preventing us from implementing what we have agreed upon. So I think the voice of everyone is to be listened to when it is articulate and representing aspirations of millions of people who come together. And then institutions will be forced to take into account. Governments will have to take into account. And I think now, for instance, the fact that the Secretary General has brought the advocates for SDGs, very young voices. I think it will shake people to listen and not to ignore. And we need to include even mechanisms of accountability.
Ms. Michel, clearly your wisdom and your experience over your lifetime is invaluable to this conversation. And yet, looking towards the future, what brings you hope?
Exactly, to be listening to Valentina, listening to Malala, listening to Eddie Ndlovu, listening to Greta Thunberg, these young, vibrant and dynamic young people who have embraced global issues, which we adults, perhaps we do not have any more creative ways of tackling them. And they come with their imagination, with their forcefulness, and they challenge us in a way perhaps we were not used to be. And for me, the hope is exactly to feel that this young generation is taking up responsibility. It brings fresh ideas, which are in fact, they are scientifically well founded, and they encourage us to move forward. And these are the voices which are telling us that, like them, there are millions of young people like those. It's not the future, as Valentina is saying, it's the present, which is with us now, which is shaping a new future. So I listen with pleasure and with humility, and I feel in my heart that, the world is in good hands.
How does technology help create change for the future?
In October 18 from 2019, in my country, Chile, we wake it up, what we call it, the social outbreak, and started when the subway ticket had an increase of 30 Chilean pesos, and the Chilean students, children and teenagers, they evaded the payment of that ticket on protest for the increasement. It ended up with the biggest national march in the history of my country, all that because of youth. I think that that's my hope. Things are happening and youth is making that happen. I know we're changing the world, we just need the word to see it.
I'm not getting audio.
You know, the Sustainable Development Goals speaks to issues of concern, issues which are affecting our everyday lives, wherever you are, whatever it's your age, whatever it's your profession. And because of that, I feel we need to just build bridges and complementarities to work together. Those who are in the political sphere, those who are in science, those who are in business, those who are researchers, those who are civil society organizations, is grassroots, those who are activists. Sustainable Development Goals have a task to every single one of us. Perhaps I will add that we need to build the social contracts. You can't be doing good if you don't have clarity on what your responsibilities are, what is the responsibility of others, and we have a space in which we take stock, we see what's going on well, what need to be corrected, but we make each one of us also accountable to move forward with the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. And I think these spaces of working together, but also of accountability, are important, because we have been making some promises which are unmet. This is totally unacceptable. So those spaces of working together, accountability, and moving, encouraging every one of us that it is possible, it has to be done, it is for the good of all of us. Those spaces are needed for implementation of the SDGs.
Ms. Michelle, the wisdom of the elders, and Ms. Ravanal, the wisdom of our youth. Thank you both so much in joining us in conversation. Incredibly insightful. And thank you for joining us online.
Thanks, Juju, and certainly very inspiring words there from Ms. Michelle and Ms. Rabanel. Now, let's turn to the UN Secretary General's opening remarks. We outlined 5 areas where urgent action is needed to keep the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals. At the heart of this is ending the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic and leveraging the recovery and to accelerate transitions needed to achieve sustainable development across our unequal world. And haven't the vaccines taught us that? As we navigate this uncertain terrain, we have a unique opportunity to tackle systemic risks that have been ignored for decades. Fragility in health systems, gaps in social protection, an accelerating climate crisis, and deficits in global cooperation, among others. This can be the pandemic's silver lining. To dig deeper into what it will take to get the SDGs back on track, we have two esteemed speakers who will bring a wealth of experience and knowledge. First, here with me in studio, Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme and Vice Chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Toby.
Ms. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, joins us virtually. Ms. Songwe, good to see you and welcome.
Good morning to you all. Good morning, Akim. Nice to see you too.
Hello, Vera.
To begin, I want to focus on the most pressing issue, saving lives and ending the pandemic. Having developed vaccines in record time, so far the world has failed to secure their equitable distribution. 80% of the vaccine doses have been administered in high and upper middle income countries so far. Just 2%, let me say that again, just 2% of the total has been administered in Africa. Truly damning statistics. Vera Songwe, Dr. Tedros of the World Health Organization recently mentioned some of the initiatives underway to increase access to COVID-19 vaccines globally. What is being done to increase vaccine access in Africa? And more importantly, what still needs to be done?
Thank you. Thank you again for having us in this conversation. I think that what we are talking about here is healthcare, but healthcare is also about protecting jobs and about delivering prosperity. What do we still need to do? Of course, when you say 2%, 2% is not nearly where we need to be. Africa CDC and the director of Africa CDC have said that Africa needs to get to at least 70% vaccinated by the middle of next year. So that's the goal, that's the ambition, that's the target. What we're doing is we've sort of sliced those targets in 3 phases. We wanted to get to 10% vaccinated by the end of September and 30% vaccinated by the end of December. That means that we need to get the vaccines. We need to get the financing, then we need to get the vaccines. The African Union, under Cyril Ramaphosa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of South Africa, put together a team, the African Vaccines Acquisition Task Team, to see whether we could at least get to 30% of vaccines. We were able to do that, I'm happy to say, through very innovative financing engineering by Afri-Exim Bank, working together under the leadership of Strive Masiwiya, who is a multi-billionaire on the continent, but who is the task force and special envoy for these African dose vaccines. But it's not enough. We're just at 30%. The COVAX vaccine, which is the partnership part of this conversation, has not delivered what it's supposed to deliver. But that is also because we don't have access to the vaccines. Today, we're in a very interesting situation where Africa has the financial resources inside the African Union with the Afri-Exim Bank to purchase vaccines, but we don't have the vaccines to buy. The donors have offered to provide vaccines, but the donors don't have the vaccines to purchase either, because what we are seeing is a lot of anti-competitive, non-trade barrier measures that are being put in. We cannot export vaccines. No countries from the West are letting vaccines out until they've satisfied their populations. So we really do need to look at our trade agreements, open up that segment, but more importantly, we need to produce more vaccines on the African continent. Today, South Africa and Senegal already produce vaccines, but let's not forget that actually many African countries also produce vaccines for animals. And so we already have the technology. We could do more, we could do better. Yes, today we're talking about COVID vaccines, but you know, there are 4 different diseases that kill, and I want to expand the conversation just a little bit. 30 million children suffer, and over 500,000 children die from vaccine-preventable diseases in Africa. 30 million children suffer, and 500,000 die from vaccine-preventable diseases on our continent. If we could produce those vaccines, retrovirus, pneumococcal diseases, measles, and rubella, with $13 billion a year of investment that we could get our private sector to do.
Right.
So I think it's not just about the COVID vaccine. We need to have a combination of different vaccines that we produce that can do that. Senegal, Rwanda, Ghana,
right,
of course, Morocco and Egypt have all now begun to produce vaccines, but we need to ensure that we have a pool procurement mechanism that can then also buy the vaccines. And this is where we're working with WHO, UNICEF, and others to make sure, and COVAX, to make sure that not only is the production done, but also the purchase, because that's really what's the most important. Somebody must buy the vaccines when you produce them.
Let me bring you in here, Akim Stein.